Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic. In this topic, we'll look at the disaster management and mitigation. So until now, we understood what a disaster is, what we mean by disaster. We also looked at types of disaster and the main natural disasters, right? Now we'll try to understand how do we manage those disasters when it occurs and how do we prevent those disasters, all right? Now, disaster management basically means, what is disaster management? What do we mean by that? So, disaster management basically means dealing with the risk of a disaster and its avoidance. How do we avoid it? How do we prevent it? Okay. It also means making preparation for dealing with disasters properly before they even occur. So disaster management is basically how you prepare before the disaster actually takes place for the disaster not to take place. Okay? And mitigation, what does mitigation mean? Mitigation is basically efforts. It means efforts which we apply to minimize the loss of property and life by reducing the impact of the disasters. So when disasters take place, it impacts the lives of the people. It leads to destruction of properties and damage of buildings, houses, roads, etc. Right? So mitigation is basically efforts which we put so that that impact is lessened. That impact is not so worse. Okay, so that is mitigation. So disaster management and mitigation, it goes hand in hand. We cannot do only one and leave the other. We have to prepare ourselves to manage, to deal with the disaster, to prevent it. At the same time, after it happens, how do we help the people? What do we do when such disasters take place? So all these goes hand in hand. So before we try to learn about disaster management and mitigation, we have to understand the disaster. We have to have knowledge of disaster. We have to know what flood is, what tsunami is. We have to make ourselves aware. And then we also need to put continuous and conscious effort, okay, along with the government at every level. So it needs to be a collective work, teamwork. Okay, it has to be teamwork where everybody comes together to find solutions when disasters take place, to prevent the disasters after we learn about it, after we understand about it. Okay. So there are three kinds of efforts that one needs to put, whether it is you, whether it's me, whether it's government. And those are, number one, preventive measures. Measures to prevent the disasters before it occurs. The response after it occurs, what do we do? Okay, the reaction to it, how do we react to it? How do we provide help to the people who have been impacted by disasters? Okay, so preventive measures, response and reaction, these are the three important efforts that needs to be put for the proper management and mitigation of disasters. So we learned about earthquakes in the earlier topic, right? So we learned what causes the earthquakes. Now when earthquakes are caused, right, when earthquakes takes place, what do we do? How do we react to it? Okay, so there are few things that we have to remember. First is that we have to check for hazards. When we live in an area, when we live in a place which experiences a lot of earthquakes, we have to see whether the electric poles are correctly put, whether the electric wires are snapped or not, whether the building is built in such a manner that, you know, the weight of the building is divided proportionately, whether the weight of the tank, water tank, is put correctly, balancing the structure, right? So all those needs to be taken care of and checked, all right? The second thing is we have to identify outdoor and indoor safe places. So before we understand that earthquakes take place in the area you live, before you do that, you have to make yourself aware if earthquakes take place, whether you have a safe place to go or not, and whether that safe place is indoors or outdoors. If you are indoor during an earthquake, where do you hide? Where is the safe place? If you are outdoors, then where do you go during the earthquake? So that has to be identified. Number 3 is educating yourself and family members, spreading awareness about earthquake and its preventive measures. Okay, so awareness should be spread amongst your friends, amongst your families, amongst your colleagues, amongst your relatives, etc. Everyone needs to be told and taught what one should do when earthquake occurs. What is an earthquake? How to save oneself from the earthquake, etc. Number 4 is that we also must be aware and help others in need during such disaster. Okay, and we need to prepare ourselves before the disaster takes place. So there needs to be mock drills, okay, which needs to be conducted to prepare everyone in case an emergency arises. So people need to be told that when disaster takes place, then what do? You press a button to alert everybody, and everybody should go to the basement to hide, or that is the safe place. So such safety drills need to be conducted in for emergency purposes. Okay. The 5th is that when buildings are constructed, the area needs to be analyzed. The area needs to be properly seen, whether there are any plain surface or whether there are buildings or towers nearby, okay, because in times of earthquake, then the towers are likely to fall on the building. Okay, on the area where you live. So that area needs to properly analyzed before constructing anything. The 6th point is that the structures which we built, that needs to build in such a manner that it can withstand, it can not just fall, or it cannot break when earthquake occurs. It needs to be strong. Okay. And the 7th and the last point is that the buildings, public buildings like schools, hospitals, government buildings, need to build in such a manner that they during the earthquake can withstand the shaking, withstand the earthquake and not collapse easily. Okay, so these are some of the preventive measures, or these are some of the responses that we need to prepare ourselves with before earthquake takes place or during the earthquake. Okay, now the second disaster that we are going to see is landslides. So in the previous topic we learned what landslides are, but when landslides occur, what do? How do we prevent landslides from occurring? So in order to prevent landslides from occurring, we install protective covers such as metal wire, mesh along the mountain sides or along the slopes of the mountain. So this mesh, okay, this net-like structure, they hold the land mass properly. They hold the rocks and the stones properly, and they do not just slide off the slope of the mountain. Okay, so such preventive measures can be taken. And another preventive measure is by setting up warning signals near sensitive areas. If certain areas are prone, are easily or if such areas are, if some areas are such that landslide can occur easily in those areas, then warning signals should be put there to make the people alert and aware of the situation of that particular area. Okay, one must also keep a check on securing the water seepage and the drainage system. If you do not control the drainage and the water seepage, if the water is going into the mud, into the land, then that leads to the loosening of the land, and that will also cause or result in the landslide. Okay, so one needs to secure the water seepage and the drainage system. Another way to prevent landslide is by mapping the underground soil, by analyzing the underground soil to make sure to find out the weak spots. If there are any weak spots, if there are any seepage, if there are any drainage problem, or if there are any strong spots. So if the weak spots are identified, then you take measures like you put metal wire mesh cover to hold that land mass. Okay, so these are some of the preventive measures that one can take to protect oneself or the area from landslides. Okay, now the next disaster that we are going to look at is flood. In times of flood, what do we do? What do we do? How do we protect ourselves in times of flood? So we can protect ourselves from the occurrences of flood by constructing elevated buildings with stronger support foundations. So if you build normal buildings like this, on the level of the ground, then if the area is flood prone area where flood occurs frequently, then you build a house with foundation. Okay, so you build the staircase here instead of the base, the bottom of the building, being attached to the surface of the earth. You build stronger support foundations and you build the house on an elevated foundation. Okay, so that if even the flooding occurs, then it does not reach the house. Okay. Another way to prevent the flood to take place is by improving the drainage structure, improving the river system, okay, building proper banks, so all that can lead to prevention of floods to occur. And another way is also by controlling the land use, the usage of land. People carelessly use the land. Okay, like for example, if the banks of the river is empty, now people begin to use that land to cultivate, to settle. And when the flood occurs, then people living on the bank, they get swept away. Okay, so by controlling the use of land, one can also prevent occurrences of flood or protection from the flood. Other ways to prevent and protect oneself from flood are by constructing dams, reservoirs, and reforestation projects as well. Deforestation is one of the main cause of flood. Okay, cutting of trees, felling of trees. So by planting more trees, one can also prevent floods from occurring. The next disaster that we are going to talk about is cyclones. What do we do when cyclones occur? So first we need to make sure that we have radio and we have torchlight with spare batteries. So in times of cyclone, we listen to the news and we follow instructions provided to us through radio. Okay, and during cyclones we lose electricity, so we keep some light handy, ready for use. Okay, the second is by identifying, by making sure that we have a safe place to hide at higher altitude, not on the plain areas but at hilly areas, little elevated areas. Okay, we also keep emergency kits ready and handy. Okay, emergency kits like first aid box, food, medicine, clothes, etc. So if you need to evacuate, in times of evacuation, if you have to leave the place which has been affected by a cyclone, then you have basic necessities. You have food, you have clothes, you have medicine, etc. Similarly, we have to keep our documents and valuables, jewelry, money also ready and safe. Okay, so that in times of evacuation, in times of shifting, moving out, we have the things that we need. And the another response to cyclone is to stay indoors until we are advised to go outside. During cyclones, one is not advised to go out of the house or out of the office or building, okay, and expose themselves to the outside. One should stay indoors till the government or the authorities advise the people to go out. Okay, so those are some of the preventive measures for fighting cyclones. Now the next disaster is drought. Okay, so what do we do in times of drought? So we can prevent the drought by studying the weather patterns, all right, by making sure that the ground level, the groundwater is available and we are not facing shortage of groundwater. So by constantly checking the level of the ground water, by monitoring rainfall and crop conditions, by assessing land use, the use of land, how land is being used, by also managing the water, okay, by also using techniques or finding techniques for proper management of water, by conserving water, by also increasing the public awareness of water conservation, by also increasing awareness of water conservation and water management, we can also prevent the occurrences of drought. Okay.